There are very few people who can claim to have moved the use and understanding of social media further than Brian Solis. Brian understood, sooner than most, that the Web 2.0 revolution was going to change the way we communicate to consumers, forever. He's written about the topic before, most notably in his book Putting the Public Back in Public Relations, and quite regularly on his blog at www.briansolis.com. His latest book, Engage, is the most comprehensive book written to date on the topic and answers almost any question you could possibly have about social media and how brands and organizations can use it to their advantage. So buckle up and get ready for a tour de force on where social media has been and where it's heading. What is social media? There have been so many different definitions of the term that we'd forgive you for not quite understanding what the term social media actually means. And if you had asked Brian this question a few years ago, he might have said that social media is any tool or service that uses the internet to facilitate conversations. Ask him today, and he'll tell you that social media is the democratization of information, transforming people from content readers into publishers. It is the shift from a broadcast mechanism, one-to-many, to a many-to-many model, rooted in conversations between authors, people, and peers. The difference between the first definition and the second is incredibly important to pay attention to. Just a few short years ago, social media was just a collection of tools that kids and techies paid attention to. Just a few short years ago, you had no idea what Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube actually were. Today, we realize that they're bringing a complete transformation in how we communicate. Consumers are no longer people to be talked at or manipulated. Today, they can talk back. Today, they can organize revolts against your company and sometimes even your advertising. And today, they can also help you define the next big product or service in your industry. They can help you reach millions of people for the cost that it takes to reach hundreds. Think of it this way. There are three things you could do once receiving a message. First, you could do nothing. Since the dawn of advertising, this was the default state. Sure, you may convince me to buy a product when I see you in the store, but it's most likely I would keep your message to myself. Second, you could take offense to the message and talk back. Or worse, you could organize your friends in a mass revolt of the company that sent the message. Third, you could be inspired by the message or entertained and pass it on to thousands of people you are connected to in your social networks. Sure, this is an oversimplification, but for the most part it's correct. You'll notice that the options 2 and 3 were not available to us until very recently. The point is that the brands and companies that notice this huge shift and shift their thinking about communications accordingly will increasingly become the companies that win. As Brian tells us, social media needs to become a much larger part of our communication strategy, and that parts 2 and 3 are going to happen with or without you. Take that definition and tape it to the wall. What people are doing online. It's likely that at some point you've been exposed to the debate about whether or not your customers are using social media. It's a common argument and a logical one at that. So let's look at it. Forrester, a marketing and technology research company, has some great data on this point. First, consider that one report they published found that 4 in 5 adults, 82% to be exact, in the United States now participate socially. That's an impressive number on its own. But let's dig a little further. In 2007, that number was 56%. That means in a couple of short years, a full 26% of the population has now joined the game. In short, that argument might have held water a couple of years ago, but not anymore. Now that we have conclusive evidence that a large number of the people you're trying to connect with use social media, let's take a look at what people are doing in the social media space. Forrester also published a study that groups these people on rungs of their social technographic ladder. Here are the different categories your customers potentially fall into. Inactives. You don't participate in social media. That number today is 18%. Spectators. You only read blogs, listen to podcasts, or watch online videos. That number today is 73%. Joiners. You have a profile on a social network like Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Today, that number is 51%. In 2007, it was 25%. Big shift. Collectors. You use RSS readers or alerts to bring the content from around the internet to you in one localized place. Today, that number is 21%. Critics. You post reviews on websites about the things that you've purchased. Today, that number is 37%. And finally, creators. You actively create content for the web, including, but not limited to, blogs, podcasts, and videos. Today, that number is 24%. We've gone from a world where there are a handful of television networks, newspapers, magazines, and radio stations producing the content that we all consume to about 1/4 of the population of people in North America joining the game. Wow. Remember, this is where we are today. We are quickly moving towards a world where social media simply becomes the way we communicate. This includes your customers and prospects. Even those of you who sell to older people who don't use the internet. Well, don't worry, they will. Defining an online persona. So, you're convinced that it's finally time to join the social media game. Now what? If you listen to many of the social media experts, you might be inclined to listen and then join the conversation. But as Brian points out, this is akin to jumping on a treadmill that leads to nowhere. He asks us 5 very important questions before we get started. Number 1, what is it that we want to accomplish? Well, this seems pretty obvious, right? But for far too many people, getting a Facebook page or getting a Twitter account is a substitute for a sound business strategy. So, first things first, understand what you want to accomplish with your social media plan. Sure, there will be happy surprises when you start engaging, and you can't even imagine at the moment. But because you never know what might happen, doesn't pass muster with many people who fund social media projects. One note of caution, be as specific as possible with this one. Growing revenues or cutting costs isn't a strategy any more than breathing air tomorrow morning is. Number 2, how do we wish to be viewed? This is another great question to consider before you jump into social media as a company. Once again, the social media experts might tell you to be yourself. And that's fine if you're selling stamps from your basement. But if you're going to be interacting with your organization's customers and potential customers, you probably want to think about this one a little bit harder. If you're serving the insurance industry, for instance, you probably don't want to be portraying a carefree attitude about risk and posting pictures of the company party where the boss had a few too many cocktails. Number 3, how are we contributing to the depiction of the brand? To take the last question a little bit further, how are the things you'll be doing in social media reflect on the brand? Perhaps you can use social media to counteract a seemingly false perception of your brand. Or maybe you're completely happy with how your customers view you and you want your social presence to add to this perception. Whatever you do, make sure your social media strategy ties back into your business and communication strategy. Number 4, what do we stand for and what are our core values? Again, this seems like it should be obvious, but to most people it isn't. For instance, if you work at Zappos, you'd probably want to make sure that whatever you did online on behalf of the company connected back to one of your company's 10 core values. Number 5, where do we stand in these social networks as it relates to the culture of each? And where do I, as a spokesperson, fit in the mix? Before you hop into the different social networks that are at your disposal, you want to consider the differing cultures of each network. Let's use a business analogy to discuss this one. Let's say you've been tapped by the CEO to head off to China, and then India, and then South Africa on a whirlwind tour on behalf of your company. Assuming that you haven't been to these places before, you'll probably receive some training on the cultures and norms of these countries. There are cultures and norms in each different social network. Understanding them before you head out and engage will be critical to your success. Defining the rules of engagement. So you've done your homework and you're ready to jump into the conversation. Now you'll want to define the rules of engagement. One of the concerns many companies have is how to control what employees do with social media and are concerned over letting go of their brand to the masses. Ignoring the fact that these conversations will happen with or without you, the way around that is to define the ground rules that your employees will abide by. There are plenty of great examples to find in this book and online. Just type social media policy in your favorite search engine and you'll find many different examples to choose from. Although you want to make sure that your policy contains a lot of the do's and don'ts from a company perspective, you also want to include some proactive advice on how to succeed. Here are some of my favorites from Brian's book. 1. Participate where your presence is advantageous and mandatory. Don't just participate anywhere and everywhere. 2. Consistently create, contribute to, and reinforce service and value. Keep in mind that there are many different potential uses of social media. to communicate in the traditional sense, to provide customer service, even to collaborate with your customers. 3. Learn from each engagement. This is new ground for everybody, and we have no idea what the next 5 years is going to bring us. A test and learn approach to the medium is critical for your success. 4. Establish and nurture beneficial relationships online and in the real world, as long as public perception and action is important for your business. Remember, social media is not about typing on a computer. Use it to connect and engage with your stakeholders in the physical world as well. In conclusion, this book is easily the most encyclopedic on the topic of social media, and we can't even come close to summarizing everything that it has to offer. It's a book that you'll want to consider using as a guide in your journey rather than light weekend reading. If you want to advance your knowledge of the social media space and carve a path forward for your organization, this is a book for you.